The explosion was supposed to end the mission. The desert was silent. The ground looked empty. But the dog stopped, not because he was afraid, because he knew something his handler did not. 1 second later, the ground exploded where the man would have stepped. And when the smoke cleared, the dog refused to leave him. All night. Through pain. Through fear. Some people call it instinct. Others call it loyalty.
Easy, boy.
But sometimes
okay.
God sends his protection in a form
Watch the dog.
we never
Keep it steady.
expect. The city ended without ceremony. One moment there were dim streetlights and abandoned storefronts, the last signs of human routine clinging to the edge of the road. And then there was nothing but desert. The asphalt narrowed and cracked, surrendering to sand and gravel, and the night air cooled rapidly as the sun vanished behind distant ridgelines. The sky above was cloudless, heavy with stars that seemed too sharp, too close, as if the desert had peeled away a layer of protection and left the world exposed. A dry wind moved steadily across the ground, carrying fine dust that whispered against Lucas Hale's boots. The temperature drop was abrupt, the kind that crept beneath fabric and settled into joints. He registered it without complaint. Discomfort had long ago become background noise. Lucas paused at the edge of the industrial zone and scanned the horizon. He was tall, lean, and built with an efficiency that came from decades of refinement rather than brute force. His movements were controlled, economical, each one deliberate. Short-cropped dark hair showed streaks of gray at the temples, and his face bore the calm of a man who had survived enough chaos to understand that panic wasted time. His eyes, steady and watchful, reflected the faint starlight as they moved from shadow to shadow, never lingering too long. At his left side walked Rook. The German shepherd was large, solidly built, with a deep chest and powerful shoulders that hinted at strength held in reserve. His coat was a dense blend of black and sable, well maintained despite the environment, with the first signs of age showing in the subtle silvering around his muzzle. At 8 years old, Rook had passed the reckless urgency of youth. What he carried now was judgment. His ears stayed forward, adjusting constantly to sounds Lucas could not hear, and his amber eyes held a quiet focus that suggested he was not merely reacting to the world, but interpreting it. Rook did not strain at the lead. He did not lag behind. He moved in perfect alignment with Lucas, close enough for contact, far enough to work independently. Their partnership had been forged over years of shared missions and near misses, a relationship built on trust that did not require constant reinforcement. Lucas had learned to read Rook's posture the way other men read maps. Ahead of them, the abandoned facility rose from the desert floor like a relic left behind by a forgotten ambition. Concrete buildings sagged under decades of neglect, their edges softened by erosion. A row of storage tanks leaned at uneven angles, rust staining their sides like old wounds. Sections of fencing lay collapsed, not violently breached, but gradually pressed inward by time and wind. No lights, no movement, no sound of machinery or wildlife. The absence itself felt deliberate. Lucas lifted a hand slightly, not a command so much as a shared signal. Rook adjusted instantly, lowering his head and slowing his pace. They crossed from cracked asphalt onto gravel, each step measured. Lucas's boots made almost no sound, but he still placed them carefully, mindful of how noise traveled in open spaces like this. This was a reconnaissance mission, limited in scope and time. Lucas was the advance element, tasked with assessing the site before the rest of the team moved in. The others waited at a distance, maintaining radio silence, trusting his judgment and Rook's instincts. There would be no engagement tonight, no clearing of structures. Observe, confirm, reposition. That was all. They moved along the perimeter, keeping to the edges of the compound. Rook worked slightly ahead, nose close to the ground, occasionally pausing to examine disturbed patches of sand or gravel. There were no fresh footprints, which was unusual in itself. Even abandoned places collected traces of animals, wind patterns, and decay. This place felt curated, as though someone had taken care to remove signs rather than leave them to fade. Lucas crouched near a shallow depression in the ground where gravel had been redistributed in a way that did not match the surrounding terrain. He did not touch it, only noted it, committing its position to memory. His eyes tracked upward to the nearest building. Dark windows stared back, empty and unreflective. He felt a subtle tightening in his chest, the familiar sensation that came when something did not align. Rook slowed, then stopped, not abruptly, not tensely. He simply ceased moving, one paw lifted slightly above the ground, his body suddenly rigid. Lucas froze with him, breath shallow, muscles coiled. He followed Rook's gaze to a narrow access path between two structures. The ground there looked unremarkable at first glance, flat and undisturbed, but the longer Lucas studied it, the more wrong it felt. Too even, too intentional. Lucas shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, preparing to step forward for a closer look. Rook stepped into his path. There was no growl, no bark. Rook turned his head and looked directly at Lucas, eyes steady, unblinking, and then planted himself squarely in front of him. The message was unmistakable. Lucas stopped. The desert seemed to quiet further, as if even the wind had paused to listen. Lucas scanned the ground again, slower this time, forcing himself to see rather than assume. Subtle details emerged. A faint line where dust had been brushed back into place, a barely visible cable edge disappearing beneath sand, the unnatural straightness of a surface that should have been irregular. None of it was obvious. Together, it formed a pattern. Lucas exhaled slowly through his nose and lowered himself into a crouch, careful not to disturb the area. He rested a hand briefly against Rook's shoulder, feeling the dog's muscles tense but controlled beneath his palm. "Good," he murmured, a quiet acknowledgement rather than praise. He did not reach for his radio. Not yet. Instead, Lucas shifted laterally, adjusting his angle of approach. He was not retreating. He was repositioning, testing the edges of the space, mapping the invisible boundaries of whatever had been left behind. Rook mirrored the movement, maintaining his position between Lucas and the suspicious ground, his focus unwavering. As they moved, more inconsistencies revealed themselves. A metal panel that sat a fraction higher than its surroundings, a length of wire partially concealed beneath gravel, the absence of natural debris in places where wind should have piled it. This was not neglect, it was preparation. Lucas felt a familiar clarity settle over him. Whoever had set this place had not intended to be present. There would be no enemy stepping from the shadows, no confrontation to resolve the tension. This was a waiting trap, patient and silent, designed to do its work without witnesses. He adjusted his route again, careful to keep his distance from the access path Rook had flagged. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, every step placed with caution. Rook stayed close, occasionally glancing up at Lucas as if checking alignment, then returning his attention to the ground ahead. They reached a point where the perimeter curved, offering a new angle on the facility. From here, Lucas could see more of the layout, enough to understand that the danger was not isolated. Whatever had been set here was layered, subtle, meant to catch those who trusted the quiet. Lucas stopped once more and studied the compound in silence. The buildings loomed motionless, offering no hint of the threat they concealed. The desert absorbed sound and light alike, making everything feel distant and unreal. Rook shifted slightly, ears flicking as if committing the place to memory. Lucas did not move forward. He did not withdraw. He remained exactly where he was, at the edge of the danger, aware now that the ground ahead demanded patience rather than progress. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. And in that silence, Lucas understood that the most dangerous thing about this place was not what it would do when triggered, but how easily it invited a man to take just one more step. Lucas Hale shifted his weight, careful, deliberate, testing the ground with the patience drilled into him by years of surviving places that punished impatience. The desert facility lay unchanged from moments before, silent and motionless. But the stillness now felt sharpened, as if it were watching him in return. The cold had deepened, settling into the air with a dry bite that carried the faint smell of metal and dust. Lucas adjusted his stance, eyes scanning the narrow corridor of ground ahead, the route that seemed marginally safer than the access path Rook had already rejected. Rook stayed close, shoulder nearly brushing Lucas's leg, his posture tense but controlled. The German shepherd's ears were forward, not rigid, but alert, tracking details beyond human perception. His breathing was slow, measured. At 8 years old, Rook no longer reacted with youthful urgency. He evaluated. He decided. His amber eyes flicked between the ground and Lucas, as if calculating distance, consequence, and time. Lucas took a half-step forward. Rook moved instantly. The dog lunged sideways, not in panic, but with precise force, teeth catching the fabric of Lucas's pant leg just below the knee. The pull was sharp enough to unbalance him, dragging his foot backward across gravel. Lucas stumbled, instinctively throwing his weight back to keep from falling. The explosion came less than a second later. The ground ahead erupted in a violent bloom of fire and debris, a concussive force that slammed into Lucas's chest and rattled the air from his lungs. Heat rolled outward, followed by a shockwave that sent dust and fragments of concrete skyward. The sound was immense, a single brutal crack that shattered the desert silence and echoed off the empty structures. Lucas hit the ground hard, breath torn from him, vision narrowing to flashes of light and shadow. The impact rattled his bones, and pain flared along his side, where shrapnel sliced through fabric and skin. The world tilted, then steadied, leaving behind a high, ringing tone that drowned out everything else. Rook was already over him. The German shepherd planted himself between Lucas and the smoking crater, legs braced, body low, head angled toward the disturbed ground. He did not bark. He did not retreat. His attention was fixed, absolute, scanning for changes that could signal a secondary threat. Dust settled slowly around them, coating his coat in a fine gray layer that made the dark fur along his back stand out in sharp contrast. Lucas coughed, forcing air back into his lungs, each breath shallow and painful. He tried to push himself up and failed, a sharp jolt of pain locking his torso in place. His hand slipped in the gravel, fingers coming away wet. He registered the blood without alarm. Training took over, categorizing the injury even as his body protested. "Rook," he managed, voice rough, barely more than a breath. "Easy." Rook did not move away, but his ears flicked back briefly at the sound of Lucas's voice, a sign that he was listening even as he guarded. He shifted his stance slightly, placing more of his weight between Lucas and the blast site, as if anchoring him to the ground. The air smelled of burned explosives now, sharp and acrid, mingling with dust and scorched earth. Lucas forced his breathing into a slower rhythm, fighting the instinct to move. He knew better. In places like this, the first explosion was often an invitation, not a conclusion. He turned his head carefully, scanning what little he could see from the ground. The crater ahead was jagged and uneven, debris scattered outward in a pattern that suggested a buried device rather than a surface charge. There were no footsteps, no shadows moving among the buildings. Whoever had set the bomb was long gone. The danger remained. Lucas shifted again, trying to find a position that relieved the pressure on his side. Rook reacted immediately, pressing his body closer, a solid weight that pinned Lucas gently but firmly in place. The message was clear. "Do not move." Lucas exhaled slowly, letting his head rest back against the gravel. He trusted the dog more than his own instincts at this moment. Rook's reactions were not fear-driven. They were calculated. The dog's attention flicked to a length of exposed cable now visible near the edge of the crater. then to a section of ground slightly farther out, where the dust pattern did not look right. Rook gave a low, controlled sound deep in his chest, not a growl meant to threaten, but a signal of concern. His body remained rigid, a living barrier. Lucas closed his eyes briefly, not in surrender, but in concentration. He forced himself to stay still, counting breaths, grounding himself against the pain. He thought of the team waiting miles away, unaware of how close the mission had already come to ending. He thought of how easily he would have stepped forward if not for Rook's intervention. When he opened his eyes again, the dust had settled enough to reveal more of the ground. The explosion had exposed additional wiring beneath the surface, thin lines running outward like veins. A layered system. Not one device, but several, spaced carefully, meant to punish any attempt at investigation or rescue. Lucas swallowed. His radio was still intact, pressed against his chest beneath his gear. Reaching for it would require movement, and movement was exactly what Rook was preventing. "I know," Lucas whispered, voice low and steady despite the pain. "I know." Rook did not relax, but his breathing slowed further, his focus shifting from the crater to Lucas himself, as if reassessing the immediate priority. The dog lowered his head slightly, nose brushing Lucas's shoulder, inhaling his scent, checking for changes. Satisfied for the moment, Rook returned his attention outward, ears swiveling independently. Time stretched. The desert reclaimed its silence, broken only by the faint hiss of settling debris and Lucas's controlled breathing. The stars above remained indifferent, unchanged by the violence below. Lucas tested his fingers, then his toes, minimal movement, just enough to assess function. Pain answered him, but nothing worse. He remained still, letting the assessment run its course in his mind. He was alive. That was not luck. That was Rook. Minutes passed, or seconds. It was hard to tell. Rook shifted again, adjusting his stance to account for the slight change in Lucas's breathing. He remained vigilant, but there was a subtle difference now, a readiness that suggested he was preparing for the next phase rather than reacting to the last. Lucas understood. The explosion had changed the environment, but it had not ended the threat. Whatever came next would require patience, not speed. He allowed himself one slow breath of gratitude, not spoken aloud, not directed anywhere in particular. Just acknowledgement. The step he had not taken lay behind him now, erased by fire and chance, replaced by a crater that marked the narrow margin between survival and silence. Lucas remained where he was, grounded by pain and held in place by a dog who understood that sometimes the only way forward was to refuse to move at all. The silence after the explosion was heavier than the blast itself. Dust hung in the air, drifting slowly, coating the ground and the broken concrete with a fine gray veil. The smell of burned metal and scorched earth lingered, sharp and dry, settling into Lucas Hale's lungs with every shallow breath. He lay where he had fallen, body angled slightly on uneven gravel, one arm pinned beneath him, the other resting uselessly at his side. Pain arrived in layers. The first was sharp and immediate, a burning line along his ribs where fragments had torn through fabric and skin. Beneath that was a deeper, heavier ache radiating through his leg, dull but insistent, making it clear that standing was no longer an option. Lucas tested a minimal shift of weight and felt the warning instantly. His body locked, muscles refusing the command. Rook answered before Lucas fully registered the danger. The German shepherd moved closer, pressing his weight against Lucas's chest and shoulder, firm and deliberate. At 8 years old, Rook's strength was no longer reckless. It was controlled, purposeful. His stance widened, paws planted solidly on either side of Lucas's body, forming a living barrier between his handler and the disturbed ground ahead. His head stayed low, eyes tracking the crater and the faintly exposed wiring with focused intensity. Lucas forced himself to stillness. He had learned long ago that survival in places like this depended on resisting the urge to act. He let his head settle back against the gravel, breath shallow but steady, eyes following Rook's line of sight. The crater was clearer now, jagged edges, scattered debris, thin cables extending outward beneath the dust, some torn loose by the blast, others disappearing into the ground. It was not a single device. It never was. The design was intentional, layered, meant to punish curiosity and movement. Rook shifted his attention slightly to the left, nose dipping toward a patch of ground where the dust lay too evenly. His body tensed, then froze again. No bark, no growl. Just warning. Lucas swallowed and kept his gaze fixed on the sky for a moment, grounding himself. The stars above were painfully bright, indifferent to the violence below. He focused on his breathing, counting each exhale, forcing his body to stay present. "I see it," he whispered, voice rough. "I'm staying." Rook did not look at him, but the pressure against Lucas's chest remained constant, approval given through action rather than sound. Minutes passed, or perhaps only seconds. Time blurred under pain and adrenaline. Lucas felt the cold seep deeper into his body, a subtle tremor beginning at the edges of his hands. Rook noticed immediately. He adjusted his position, pressing closer, sharing warmth without sacrificing vigilance. Lucas's thoughts turned outward then, toward the team waiting beyond the perimeter. They would not know what had happened unless he told them. But any movement carried risk. Even reaching across his chest could disturb the ground if done carelessly. Lucas inhaled slowly, considering his options. The radio rested against his chest, secured beneath his gear. Accessing it would require minimal movement, but not none. He glanced at Rook, searching for permission in posture and breath rather than words. Rook's ears flicked toward Lucas, then back to the ground. He lowered his head briefly, nose brushing Lucas's shoulder, inhaling. The dog evaluated not the device, but the intent. The movement Lucas was considering was small, controlled. It would not shift weight or pressure against the ground. Rook did not block him. That was all Lucas needed. He moved slowly, deliberately, lifting his hand no more than a few inches at a time. Every motion was measured, smooth, designed to avoid sudden shifts. Rook watched closely, body tense, ready to intervene if necessary. Lucas's fingers found the edge of the radio unit. He drew it up just enough to bring the microphone closer to his mouth, careful not to change his position. He keyed the transmitter for less than a second. "Advance element compromised," Lucas said quietly, keeping his voice low and even. "One detonation. I'm injured but conscious. K9 active. Suspected secondary devices. Do not approach. Repeat, do not approach until cleared." He released the button. No more, no elaboration, no questions. The message was enough. Rook remained still, eyes fixed outward, as if waiting for the ground itself to respond. When nothing happened, his posture eased by a fraction, tension redistributing rather than disappearing. He pressed closer again, re-establishing the barrier between Lucas and the unseen threats beneath the surface. Lucas exhaled slowly, the effort costing more than he wanted to admit. The act of calling it in had taken more energy than expected. Pain pulsed along his side, a steady reminder that his role in the next phase would be limited. The desert answered his transmission with silence. No footsteps, no engines, no distant voices. The facility remained empty, its danger entirely impersonal. Whoever had set the devices had trusted them to do their work without supervision, and so far that trust had been well placed. Lucas let his head turn slightly toward Rook again, studying the dog's profile in the dim light. Dust clung to the fur along his back, dulling its shine. His muzzle, already beginning to gray with age, was streaked now with ash. He looked older in this light, but no less resolute. "You did good," Lucas murmured. Rook's ears flicked once at the sound, but he did not look away from the ground. Another faint settling sound echoed from deeper within the compound, the soft collapse of debris disturbed by the blast. Rook's body tightened instantly, muscles coiling beneath his coat. Lucas held his breath, waiting. The sound faded. Nothing followed. The truth settled fully then. There was no immediate danger, but there was no safe movement either. The ground had been compromised, the structures weakened, the balance of the place altered. Any attempt to reposition without proper clearance could trigger another chain of consequences. Lucas accepted it with a quiet clarity. He had done what he could. The rest would require patience, coordination, and time. Rook remained beside him, unwavering, a constant presence against the cold and the uncertainty. His vigilance did not waver as the night deepened, his attention shifting only to account for changes in scent, sound, and Lucas's breathing. Lucas stayed still, anchored by pain and by trust, knowing that the signal he had sent would bring help eventually. Until then, survival meant listening, waiting, and honoring the instinct that had already saved his life once that night. The command center received Lucas Hale's transmission without drama. The words were brief, measured, and unmistakably controlled, the kind spoken by someone who understood the weight of every second. One detonation. Injured, but conscious. K9 active. Suspected secondary devices. Do not approach. The room did not react with noise. It reacted with motion. Screens shifted. Maps updated. A perimeter began to form long before anyone spoke. This was not a rescue to be rushed. It was a problem to be contained. From the edge of the industrial zone, drones lifted into the night air, their ascent smooth and nearly silent. Thermal imaging confirmed what Lucas had already implied. No hostile presence. No movement beyond one man and one dog. The danger was not human. It was embedded, buried, waiting. The order that followed was precise. A single medic would be deployed. Light, slow, alone beyond the perimeter. Claire Donovan stepped forward as the decision settled. She did not volunteer. She was chosen. Claire was in her late 30s, neither tall nor small, built with a quiet strength that came from endurance rather than display. Her movements were economical, every gesture stripped of excess. Dark hair was pulled back tight, revealing a face marked not by softness, but by composure. Her eyes were observant, steady, the kind that took in a scene without demanding it bend to her will. People described her as calm, but that calm had been earned. Years earlier, early in her service, she had lost a wounded soldier by moving too quickly, by believing urgency mattered more than stability. Since then, she treated every step as a decision that could not be taken back. She listened as the situation was relayed. An injured SEAL, a confirmed blast, possible secondary devices, structural instability, a German shepherd maintaining a protective posture over his handler. Claire nodded once. "I'll wait for permission," she said. "Not from command, from the dog." She moved out with minimal equipment, nothing that would add unnecessary weight or vibration. No heavy pack, no hard edges. At the outer boundary she stopped, leaving the escort behind. From here on, the responsibility would be hers alone. The desert night was colder than it looked. The wind moved low across the ground, carrying the faint, acrid scent of burned metal. Claire advanced slowly, pausing often, studying the way dust lay on the surface, the subtle signs of disturbance that spoke of something hidden beneath. She followed a route identified as marginally safer, never assuming it was safe. She saw them before she reached them. Lucas lay on the ground near the edge of the compound, body angled awkwardly, one leg extended more rigidly than the other. Even from a distance, Claire could see the restraint in him, the way he held himself still by choice rather than incapacity. And above him stood the dog. Rook was larger than most shepherds she had worked around, broad across the chest, his posture wide and grounded. Dust clung to his coat, dulling the dark fur along his back and highlighting the faint silver around his muzzle. His amber eyes locked onto Claire the moment she crossed into his awareness. There was no hostility in them, only judgment. Claire stopped. She lowered herself gradually, reducing her height, making herself smaller in the dog's field of view. She removed her helmet and set it down carefully, sliding it away with 2 fingers. Her hands remained visible, open, relaxed. She did not speak. Silence, she knew, was often the least threatening language. Rook did not move. His body remained positioned squarely between Lucas and the disturbed ground, his head tracking Claire with minute adjustments. Every part of him communicated one truth. Nothing passes without consent. Claire waited. The wind stirred dust between them. Rook inhaled, processing her scent, his ears flicking once before settling again. His stance did not soften, but it did not harden either. Claire shifted forward a single inch and stopped. Rook's muscles tensed briefly. She froze immediately, honoring the boundary. The desert seemed to hold its breath. It was then that Lucas spoke. He did not lift his head. He did not shift his body. His voice was low, roughened by pain and dust, but steady. "Easy, Rook," he said, the words barely carried on the air. "She's safe." The effect was subtle, but unmistakable. Rook's ears flicked back for a fraction of a second, acknowledging the sound. His head turned just enough to glance at Lucas, amber eyes checking the source of the command. Then he returned his focus to Claire. His stance remained wide. He did not step aside, but the tension in his frame eased, redistributed rather than released. Claire exhaled quietly. She had been granted a narrow opening, nothing more. "I'm not here to move you," she said softly, her voice low and even. "I'm here to keep you alive." Rook watched her closely as she spoke, assessing tone rather than words. Claire advanced another careful step, then stopped again. Each movement was followed by stillness, each inch earned rather than taken. When she reached a distance close enough to see Lucas's face clearly, she halted. Lucas's eyes met hers briefly. There was no fear in them, only calculation and pain held in check. Claire conducted her initial assessment without touching him. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched once and then stilled. She reached into her kit slowly and withdrew a compact sensor, extending it toward the ground between them without shifting her knees. Rook tracked the object with his nose, then returned his gaze to Claire's face when it made no sound and caused no disturbance. The reading confirmed what she already suspected. The ground was compromised. Movement would be dangerous. "Still breathing well," she said quietly, more for Lucas than for herself. "We're not moving you." Rook's tail moved once, low and restrained. Claire did not reach out. Not yet. She stayed exactly where she was, matching the dog's patience with her own. Around them, the facility remained silent, its threat impersonal and unseen. No footsteps, no voices, just the shared understanding that haste would make everything worse. Lucas remained still, pain etched into every breath, but his attention stayed on Rook. The dog had not left him, had not failed him. And now, with a single sentence, Lucas had returned that trust. The line between danger and help had shifted, not because someone forced it to, but because it had been respected. For now, that was enough. Claire settled into a waiting posture beside them, ready to act when the next window opened. Rook remained standing, vigilant, his body a living boundary. And Lucas stayed where he was, alive, because everyone involved understood that sometimes the only way to save a life was to wait until the ground allowed it. Claire Donovan stayed where she was, even after the narrow opening had been granted. The desert night remained brittle with cold, the dust under her knees rough and unforgiving, but she did not shift to ease it. Comfort could wait. Trust could not be rushed. She held her posture low, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, hands open and visible against the muted ground. Nothing in her body language asked for more than what had already been given. Rook watched her with unwavering attention. The German shepherd's stance was unchanged, broad and grounded, his body still forming a line between Lucas and the disturbed earth. Dust clung to the ridges of his coat and softened the contrast of his markings, but it did nothing to dull the clarity in his eyes. At 8 years old, Rook had learned that danger did not always come from movement. Sometimes it came from intention. He measured Claire's intent the way he measured scent, patiently, repeatedly, waiting for consistency. Lucas lay quiet beneath him, breath controlled, jaw set against pain. The blast had taken strength from his body, but not from his awareness. He felt every pause, every inch of space Claire respected, and he understood what she was doing. This was not hesitation. This was discipline. Claire advanced a fraction, then stopped. She did not crawl or lean forward. She shifted her weight in a way that barely disturbed the dust, keeping her center of gravity low and stable. She waited again, allowing Rook time to reassess. The dog's ears flicked, tracking distant sounds that never arrived, then returned to her. His head lowered slightly, nostrils flaring as he sampled the air. She spoke once, softly, and then fell silent again. "I'll stay right here." Rook did not respond outwardly. His tail remained low and still, but his shoulders eased by the smallest margin, a redistribution of tension rather than its release. Claire recognized it for what it was. Another inch earned. She moved that inch and stopped again. This rhythm continued, slow and deliberate, advance followed by stillness, motion followed by patience. Claire kept her gaze soft, never locking eyes with the dog for more than a moment. She let him dictate the pace. Each time she halted, Rook evaluated, checking the ground, the air, her hands. Each time the absence of threat held. When Claire was close enough to see the shallow cuts along Lucas's side and the strain in his breathing, she stopped completely. She did not reach for him. Not yet. Instead, she shifted her attention to the ground between them, studying the way the dust had settled, the faint lines where cables disappeared beneath the surface. She memorized what she could see without touching anything. Rook noticed the change in her focus and adjusted slightly, angling his body to maintain coverage of the most unstable area. He was not guarding Lucas from Claire. He was guarding Lucas from the ground. Claire reached slowly into her kit, her movement so controlled it seemed almost ceremonial. She withdrew a small roll of gauze and set it down beside her knee, then paused. Rook's head dipped toward the item, nose hovering inches above it. He inhaled, processing scent and intent together. When the gauze did nothing, made no sound, caused no vibration, his attention returned to Claire's face. She waited again. The cold pressed deeper into the night, and Lucas felt a tremor ripple through his body before he could stop it. Rook sensed it instantly. He shifted closer, pressing his side against Lucas's shoulder and chest, sharing warmth without abandoning his position. The contact was steady, grounding, a reminder that someone else was still carrying part of the load. "Easy," Lucas murmured, the word meant for both of them. His voice was low, controlled, more breath than sound. Rook did not move away, but his ears flicked back in acknowledgement. Claire took that as permission to proceed one step further. She extended her hand slowly, palm open, stopping well short of Lucas's body. She let it hover there, unmoving, allowing Rook to evaluate the distance. He watched the hand, then her face, then the ground beneath it. Satisfied, he did not intervene. Claire adjusted her posture slightly, bringing herself closer without shifting her knees. She kept her movements within the narrow corridor Rook had allowed. When she finally touched Lucas, It was not to examine him. It was to anchor him. Her fingers rested lightly against his forearm, steady and warm, offering contact without demand. Lucas felt it and exhaled slowly, allowing his muscles to loosen by a fraction. Claire held the contact for a few seconds, then withdrew, demonstrating restraint rather than urgency. "Bleeding looks manageable," she said quietly, her voice low and even. "I'm going to stop it where you are." Rook watched closely as she prepared the gauze. Every movement was deliberate, unhurried. She did not reach across Lucas's body. She did not shift his clothing more than necessary. She worked from the side the blast had not compromised, careful to keep her weight distributed and her motions contained. When she pressed the gauze against the wound, Lucas tensed despite himself. Pain flared, sharp and insistent. Rook responded immediately, lowering his head and pressing his muzzle briefly against Lucas's shoulder, grounding him. The pressure was gentle but firm, a reminder to breathe, to stay present. "It's all right," Claire said softly, timing her words with the rhythm of Lucas's breathing. "I've got it." She applied steady pressure, watching for changes in bleeding, adjusting only when necessary. The wound was ugly but not catastrophic. Shrapnel had done its damage and moved on. The greater danger still lay beneath them. Rook remained vigilant, his attention split between Claire's hands and the unstable ground beyond. When a faint settling sound echoed from deeper within the compound, his body tensed instantly. Claire froze, her hands still pressed against Lucas, refusing to add movement to uncertainty. They waited together, human and dog aligned in stillness. The sound faded. Only then did Rook ease by a fraction, signaling that the moment had passed. Claire resumed her work, securing the dressing with minimal motion. She did not speak again until she was finished. "That's as far as I go for now," she said quietly. "We wait." Rook's tail moved once, low and controlled. Agreement. Claire withdrew her hand slowly and settled back into her low posture, maintaining the distance Rook seemed to prefer. She remained within reach, but not intrusive, ready to act if the situation changed. The desert remained silent around them, stars wheeling overhead, indifferent to the fragile line of cooperation that had formed on the ground below. Lucas lay still, pain dulled but present, the bleeding contained for the moment. He felt the weight of Rook beside him, the steadiness of Claire's presence just beyond. The danger had not passed, but something else had taken root. A fragile trust, earned inch by inch, breath by breath. For now, that trust was enough to keep him alive. The forward medical station breathed softly around them, canvas walls shifting with the desert wind, lights humming at a low, constant pitch. Time lost its shape inside the tent. There were no windows, no clocks that mattered. Only the rhythm of machines, the rise and fall of Lucas Hale's chest, and the quiet presence that refused to let him slip too far away. Lucas drifted again, not into sleep, but into that thin, dangerous space where memory pressed hardest. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled once against the sheet, knuckles whitening before he could stop it. His breathing fractured, sharp and uneven, each inhale shorter than the last. Rook reacted instantly. The German shepherd rose without sound and moved to the edge of the curtain, stopping precisely where he had been allowed to stop. His body lowered, posture calm but alert, head angled toward Lucas. He did not bark. He did not push forward. He simply became present in a way nothing else in the room could replicate. Lucas's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they did not focus. Then they found Rook's silhouette, dark and solid against the muted light. Lucas drew a shaky breath, then another, forcing his lungs to follow the pattern his dog offered without words. "There," Claire Donovan said quietly, already at his side. Her hand hovered just above his forearm, never touching unless necessary. "Stay with that." Lucas swallowed. The tension in his shoulders eased by a fraction. His breathing slowed, each exhale longer than the last. Rook remained where he was, eyes never leaving Lucas. His ears flicked once at a distant sound outside the tent, then settled again. Whatever moved beyond the canvas was not their concern. Not tonight. The night pressed on. Hours passed in fragments. Lucas surfaced, faltered, and returned again and again, each time pulled back by the same anchors. Rook's steady watch. Claire's measured voice. The undeniable truth that he was still here, still breathing, still held to the present. At one point, Lucas's breathing hitched so sharply that the monitors spiked in response. Claire leaned in, her voice low, firm without urgency. "Lucas, listen to me." His eyes opened, glassy with exhaustion. "Look at him," she said, nodding slightly toward the curtain. Lucas did. Rook's gaze met his instantly. No command, no demand, just certainty. Lucas exhaled, long and controlled. The numbers settled. The machine quieted. Claire straightened slowly, tension easing from her shoulders. She had seen panic break stronger men than this. She had seen others slip away quietly. This was neither. This was a man being held in place by something older than memory. Rook lowered himself back to the floor, but he did not rest. His head remained up, ears alert, body aligned toward Lucas. At 8 years old, sleep was a luxury he would not take, while his handler was still drifting at the edge. Lucas lay still, eyes half open now, exhaustion weighing on him like a physical thing. The pain was still there, sharp and unyielding, but it no longer owned him completely. He focused on the sound of Rook's breathing, slow and steady, and let it guide his own. Outside, the desert remained locked in darkness. No hint of dawn touched the horizon. The night was not finished with them yet. Inside the tent, the longest hours stretched on, unbroken and unforgiving. But Lucas stayed, breath by breath, memory by memory, held in place not by walls or wires, but by a presence that refused to let the dark take more than it was owed. The night was still winning time, but it had not won him. Dawn arrived without ceremony. It did not announce itself with color or warmth at first, only with a subtle thinning of the dark. The desert outside the forward medical station remained quiet, the wind softer now, as if it too had grown tired of the night. Inside the tent, the low amber lights still hummed, but their glow no longer felt like the only thing holding back the dark. Lucas Hale woke slowly. Awareness returned before pain, a rare mercy. He became conscious of the weight of the blanket over his legs, the firmness of the cot beneath his back, the steady rhythm of his own breathing. The sharp edges of memory that had clawed at him through the night were distant now, dulled, as if they had finally exhausted themselves. When pain followed, it came measured and contained, no longer overwhelming. He did not move at first. He listened. The medical station carried its own sounds in the early hours. The muted step of boots outside, the soft rustle of canvas shifting with the wind, the low, constant murmur of equipment doing its quiet work. Somewhere nearby, someone poured coffee, the smell faint but unmistakable. Life continuing, carefully, respectfully. Then he heard it, a slow, familiar breath, steady, controlled. Lucas turned his head just enough to see beyond the curtain. Rook lay exactly where he had been through the night, stretched along the floor at the edge of the treatment area. The German shepherd's body was relaxed now, no longer coiled for immediate action, but his head was still up, ears angled forward, eyes open. His coat, cleaned earlier, caught the muted light, the black and sable broken only by the gray around his muzzle that spoke of years earned the hard way. At 8 years old, Rook's strength no longer lived in speed alone, but in judgment, in the patience to wait when waiting mattered most. Their eyes met. Rook rose immediately, smooth and silent, crossing the small distance to the cot without urgency. He stopped with his head level to Lucas's chest, close enough for Lucas to feel the warmth of him. The dog's tail moved once, slow and restrained, the smallest acknowledgment that the night was finally loosening its grip. Lucas let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Hey," he murmured, voice rough but present. Rook's ears flicked at the sound. He leaned in just enough to press his forehead briefly against Lucas's shoulder, careful of the bandaged area, then pulled back and sat. He did not climb onto the cot. He did not demand attention. He simply stayed. Claire Donovan watched from a few steps away. She looked more tired than she had allowed herself to be during the night. The tension that had held her posture rigid was gone now, replaced by a quiet weariness she did not bother to hide. Her dark hair had loosened slightly from its tight pull, a few strands escaping to frame a face marked by long hours and earned restraint. She held a cup of coffee she had forgotten to drink, the steam curling up into the cool air. "He's been waiting for that," she said softly. Lucas nodded once. "He always does." Claire stepped closer, her movements unhurried, careful not to startle either of them. She glanced at the monitors, then back to Lucas. The numbers were steady, not perfect, but stable. "Enough." "You stayed with us," she said. "All night." Lucas closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Didn't feel like winning," he said quietly. "Just staying." Claire allowed herself a small smile, the kind that didn't ask to be noticed. Sometimes that's the harder part. Rook shifted his weight and settled beside the cot, body angled so that one side faced Lucas and the other faced the open space of the tent. Even now, with the danger past, his instincts held. Protect and stay aware. The habit was too deeply woven to turn off. Outside, the sky began to change. Pale light crept along the horizon, slow and deliberate, revealing the shape of the land again. The desert was the same as it had been the night before, unforgiving and wide, but in the early light it felt less hostile, more indifferent than threatening. There was no celebration. No one clapped Lucas on the shoulder. No one spoke of bravery or close calls. The team moved with the same quiet efficiency they always did, respecting the space around the cot, around the dog who had claimed it as his post. Survival was treated not as an achievement, but as something to be preserved carefully, without tempting it to slip away. Lucas watched the light filter in, feeling its presence more than seeing it. His body was heavy, exhausted in a way that felt earned rather than dangerous. He would not be moving today. He knew that. And for the first time, the thought did not trouble him. Rook lifted his head again, ears angling toward the open tent flap as morning sounds replaced the silence of night. Distant voices, the soft clink of equipment, life reorganizing itself around the fact that one man had stayed alive. Lucas reached out slowly, stopping when his fingers brushed Rook's fur. The dog did not flinch or move away. He accepted the touch as confirmation, not comfort. Lucas rested his hand there, feeling the steady warmth, grounding himself fully in the present. No gunfire marked the dawn. No victory was declared. There was only a man who had opened his eyes to find that he was still here, and a dog who had decided hours ago that this outcome was not negotiable. The paperwork came quietly. No ceremony, no speeches. Just forms slid across a desk, signatures added where they belonged. Lucas Hale read them once, then signed without hesitation. The words confirmed what his body had already decided. He would not be returning to the front line. The desert had taken its toll, and it had left him with something else in return. He walked differently now, not slower, just more deliberate. Every step carried intention. Weeks later, the training ground stretched out before him, wide and open beneath the same unforgiving sky. The desert looked familiar here, less hostile, more honest. Rows of obstacles cut into the sand, scent lanes marked with flags, quiet structures built to teach dogs how to think instead of rush. Lucas wore no weapon, just a whistle at his neck, a clipboard under one arm, and boots already scuffed by the grit of daily work. His hair had grown a fraction longer, the gray at his temples no longer hidden. His face still held the discipline of command, but something in his eyes had softened, not weakened, refocused. Rook walked at his side. The German shepherd moved with the confidence of experience, scars earned rather than hidden beneath his thick coat. Age had slowed him only slightly, enough to make his movements economical, never wasted. His muzzle was grayer now, his gaze deeper, as if he carried the weight of the night they survived and had decided it was worth carrying. New handlers watched them from a distance. Young men and women, eager and tense, hands too tight on leashes, eyes fixed forward instead of down. Their dogs pulled, strained, tested boundaries. Energy everywhere. Control nowhere. Lucas stopped. Rook stopped with him, perfectly aligned. "Watch," Lucas said simply. He stepped forward once, then paused. Rook did not move, not because he was commanded to stay, but because he was listening. Lucas waited, letting the moment stretch, letting the silence do the teaching. "When he stops," Lucas continued, voice calm, "you stop." One handler frowned, another nodded, a third glanced down at her dog, uncertainty flickering across her face. Rook turned his head slightly, scanning the ground ahead. A buried distraction, a false scent, something meant to pull attention forward. He did not advance. He held. Lucas looked back at the group. "That's not hesitation," he said. "That's judgment." The handlers adjusted. Leashes loosened. Breathing slowed. Rook moved then, smooth and unhurried, choosing a safer line through the sand. The younger dogs watched, some mimicking clumsily, others resisting before settling. Learning happened without force. Claire Donovan observed from the edge of the field. She wore civilian clothes now, sleeves rolled, posture relaxed in a way Lucas had never seen at the command center. The lines of fatigue were still there, but they no longer owned her. She had stayed on longer than planned, drawn by something she had not named yet. "He doesn't rush them," she said. Lucas shook his head once. He never did. Rook returned to Lucas's side and sat, tail resting against the sand, not waiting for praise, just confirming position. Lucas rested a hand on the dog's head, brief and familiar. The heat of the desert pressed down around them, the same sun, the same wind. But the purpose had changed. Some missions ended in extraction. This one ended in transfer. What stayed behind was not the blast or the pain or the night that refused to end. What stayed was a lesson written without words. That speed did not equal survival. That loyalty was not loud. That sometimes the bravest decision was the one that refused to move forward until it was safe to do so. Rook rose again, ready for the next dog, the next handler, the next quiet moment that might one day save a life. Lucas followed, not back into danger, but into purpose. This story is not about explosions or missions. It is about a quiet miracle, a moment when stopping became salvation, a moment when loyalty spoke louder than fear. Sometimes God does not rescue us by pulling us forward. Sometimes He rescues us by making us pause, by placing a voice beside us that says stay, by sending help not in thunder, but in patience. Lucas survived not because he was the strongest in the field, but because he listened. Rook stayed not because he was ordered to, but because love does not abandon. That kind of love is not trained. It is given. And gifts like that do not come by accident. In our daily lives, we often rush. We rush decisions. We rush words. We rush past warnings whispered into our hearts. But faith reminds us that God often works in the quiet moments, in the hesitation, in the instinct to wait, in the presence that refuses to leave us when the night feels endless. If you are walking through a dark season right now, remember this. You are not alone. Even when you cannot see the way forward, God is still holding you in place. protecting you from steps you do not yet understand. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe to the channel so more stories of faith, love, and quiet miracles can reach those who need them. May God bless you, protect you, and walk beside you through every night and every dawn. If you believe, if you are grateful, if you are still standing because God told you to stay, comment Amen.